Hi, Assalamualaikum and good morning everyone. Welcome to my channel. Let's continue our lesson English Year 3, Unit 8. Where were you yesterday? Student book page 78 and workbook page 62. Our lesson objective for today: people should be able to talk about life in the past. Vocabulary: noisy, noisy, bising. Carriage, carriage, pedati. Activity 1, student book, page 78. A city from the past. Let's listen to the text.
A city from the past. This is a picture of New York City in the year 1900. It was very different then. There weren't any shopping centres or cinemas, but there were shops and theatres. There weren't many cars back then, but there were lots of horses and carriages. The streets of New York City weren't quiet. They were noisy and full of people, just like today.
Now let's read together. A city from the past. This is a picture of New York City in the year 1900. It was very different then. There weren't any shopping center or cinemas, but there were shops and theaters. There weren't many cars back then, but there were lots of horses and carriages. The streets of New York City weren't quiet. They were noisy and full of people, just like today. Do you understand the text? Let's answer some questions. What city are these pictures of? Remember to look at the questions. Are these pictures? So the answer: there are pictures of New York City in the year 1900. Next question: were there any shopping centers and cinema then? So the answer: no, there weren't. Were there any theaters? The answer is yes, there were. Were there many cars back then? No, there weren't. There were horses and carriages. Next question: were the streets quiet back then? No, they weren't. They were noisy and full of people back then too. Before we continue, let's learn some words here. Was, wasn't, were, and weren't. The first two words that we are going to learn are was and wasn't. Wasn't is actually a short form for was not. We use was and wasn't to describe about past tense, singular. For example, we have a theatre here, so we can say there was a theatre. Now, a bus with a big cross here means no bus, so we can say there wasn't a bus. We use were and weren't for two or many things. Plural, lebih daripada satu. Weren't is actually short form for were not. For example, we have two carriages here. We can say there were carriages. There were carriages. Now we have three cars with a big cross. We can say there weren't many cars. There weren't many cars. Let's do revision on these two words. Was and wasn't. We use it to describe one thing. There was a theatre. There wasn't a bus. And we use were or weren't for two or many things. There were carriages. There weren't many cars. Let's continue activity 2, student book, page 79. Number 2, what was there in New York City in the year 1900? Read activity 1 and tick. Let's find the answer from the text. There weren't any shopping center or cinemas, but there were shops and theaters. There weren't many cars back then, but there were lots of horses and carriages. Okay, cars tak banyak tapi ada. Okay, tapi apa yang banyak? Horses and carriages. So what is the answer? Yes, C, shops, theatres, D, car and carriages. Okay, C, D, F and G. Now continue to activity 3, student book, page 79. Look at activity 2 and write about New York City in year 1900. Use were or weren't. Okay, so sama sajalah. Tengok mana yang ada. Okay, were. Kalau tak ada, weren't. Okay, look at number 1. There any shopping centres? There weren't any shopping centres. Number 2. There were shops. How about number 3? There weren't any cinemas. Number 4, buses. There weren't any buses. Tak ada bus ya. Next, number 5. There were many carriages. And last one, number 6. There were theatres. Now, please take out your workbook, page 62, activity 1. Which one was Mr. Miller's town 80 years ago? Okay, so we need to read about Mr. Miller's town and then find the answer either picture A, B or C. 80 years ago, there weren't any shopping centres in my town. Okay, 370 tak ada kan shopping centre. Okay, there were only small shops. There weren't many cars, but there were lots of bikes. Now we can look at the picture. No bikes, B out. The streets were quiet. Sometimes there were police officer on horses. Okay, sometimes, kadang-kadang lah. Okay, tak apa, kita proceed. There were 2 theatres, but there weren't any cinemas. So picture A, no theatres. So the answer is C. Activity 2, workbook, page 62. Look at the picture of this town from the year 1900 and write. The answer are given: was, quiet, carriages, were, and cars. Number 1, in the year 1900, the streets noisy. So was tak boleh guna sebab singular, either weren't or were. So the answer is weren't. There were. So kalau tak noisy, jawapan dia apa for number 2? There were quiet. There weren't any. Apa yang tak ada? Cars. But there were horses and number 4, carriages. Number 5, there's a few shops. There were a few shops and the theatre was a theatre too. Well done everyone. Okay, for the homework, please complete your workbook page 62. Don't forget to submit your work in Google Classroom. Okay, I think that's all for today. Thank you everyone. So see you next week. Bye.